we are going to talk about two-handed Fury. Here, that's right. Why we talk about two-handed Fury? Well, first of all, I really like this spec, and second, there are a lot of misconceptions about like everything in the game almost, especially about specs that are like never played and never seen. And 200 Fury is one of those specs, so you might think it's a complete meme spec, but there are situations in which two-handed Fury is a great option, a viable option, and a very fun option as well. So this is why I really want to talk with you about that spec. So here, for example, what you want to do if you get a good mace, a good two-handed mace like the World Breaker I got right now, is you can consider go two-handed Fury. This really applies to every weapon, like you will see after the video, but especially on a mace, two-handed Fury is a great option. So first, we got to take one thing out of the way. Two-handed Fury is never an option if you are the only warrior in the raid, not in a group, in a raid, that is capable of playing arms or want to play arms, because arms warrior will out DPS, like if it's played good, will out DPS most other specs that are like melee, just because the 4% extra damage gets a lot of value, obviously increasing with the amounts of melee or the amounts of physical damage you have in your raid. So keep that in mind. Arms warrior will for your raid DPS always be a better option, but there are a lot of people that are playing Fury anyways, even though there is no arms. So why not go two-handed Fury if you can do that, right? If you want to play this spec and nobody forces you to play arms, or you maybe have an arms warrior already, or you want to swap with your Fury mate and say, hey, do you want to play arms for a couple of IDs? I would like to play two-handed Fury, try a little bit with that. Yeah, then you can do that. And yeah, so let's dive deep into the differences between arms and Fury two-handed. So to look at the differences between those specs, we want to take a close look at the abilities that they both have and the abilities they do not have in common, roll that through our knowledge of the class, and here, calculate the differences. So, let's start. The first thing we're going to look at are the abilities they both have available to them. So they both have sweeping strikes, they both have improved slam, they both use flurry, they both use heroic strike and cleave, they both use whirlwind, and here they both have death wish. So what does that all tells us about the similarities and the things that separates them from each other? So first of all, they both have sweeping strikes, so that means they are great at doing cleave or AoE DPS. Second, they both have improved slam, so this means that they both probably will use the same rotation, because they use a two-handed, they use slam. Slam can only be casted after an auto attack most of the time, or a slightly bit before that. Yeah, so this is evidence for the rotation being kind of similar, which is correct. They both have Death Wish. That means they both can burst really hard, because Death Wish gives us a 20% DPS increase, damage increase that is, and as warrior we can pull recklessness besides that, Orc racial if we are Orc, that is, and maybe a DPS trinket. So warriors have a lot of burst, and arms and two-handed Fury are no exception to that. So second, they both have flurry, but here is a slight difference that we can see already. Two-handed Fury uses 2 more talent points in flurry just because he can and the arms cannot, and this will increase our attack speed by 10%. So this means a couple of things. First of all, this means that we use up the flurry stacks 10% faster, like roundabout. So this will mean we need just a tiny bit more crit to keep the uptime. The second thing is that if we do not crit, we we lose out on 5 talent points and 25% attack speed. Which is a greater deal than if the arms wouldn't crit, because the arms loses 15% attack speed and 3 talent points. Here, so there we can see not only do we scale better on crit because we get more attack speed, but we as well get punished more if we do not have the right amount of crit. So there you can see that 2handed Fury, just in regards of crit, scales a little bit better than the arms. So let's see other abilities that they have in common. Whirlwind. So Whirlwind is the same ability on both specs, but 2handed Fury gets access to improved Whirlwind, which will decrease the cooldown by 1 or 2 seconds, depend on how many points you want to spend into the talent. And this means a couple of things. First of all, in a static AoE or cleave scenario, this would mean that the DPS that's coming from your Whirlwind is increased by 10 to 20%, which is a good amount because Whirlwind takes up a large or a good portion of our AoE or cleave DPS. The other thing that is not really visible on the first glance is that if we look at sweeping strikes last 10 seconds, and Whirlwind, with no improvement, has 10 seconds cooldown. So 99.9% of the time, we cannot use 2 Whirlwinds in the sweeping strikes window, right? So this changes with just only 1 point in improved Whirlwind, and with 2 points, you are even more likely to get 2 Whirlwinds into 1 sweeping strikes. Here, but counter Whirlwind, even if it hits 4 targets, it will only use up 1 sweeping strike stack. So this isn't really that big of an advantage, you might think right now, but in reality, improved Whirlwind has a high chance, depend on how many targets you hit, to proc extra attack, like Wind Fury. So the extra attack will not only use up 1 more stack of sweeping strike, it will as well give us a little bit more rage, with what we can then use to use up even more stacks of sweeping strikes. So right here, when we look only at Whirlwind, we can already see that the 2handed Fury has a significant advantage over the Arms Warrior. So let's look at the other 2 abilities that are left over, which is, I guess they both use Execute, but on Execute there is not a big difference, only a tiny bit difference. We can look at that at the end. So, but first we look at Heroic Strike and Cleave. So when we press Heroic Strike or Cleave, our next auto attack will be transformed to that ability, and this means that it scales relatively good with attack speed, right? Because more attack speed means more Cleave and more Heroic Strike. So in the case of Heroic Strike, this isn't really a big advantage, just because Heroic Strike isn't really that a great button to press. But in Cleave scenarios, Cleave is a great button to press. So the extra attack speed gives us like 10% more cleaves that we can throw out there in the pack, and can be a great DPS increase. So here again, we see that in a cleave scenario, the 2handed Fury again has a big advantage. So let's see what, let's take a tiny look at Execute, I guess. So Execute, with the Execute rotation, I will show in the next video, you will see that Execute damage depends a lot on your attack speed, or with other words, on your rage that you can generate. And more attack speed means more rage and more combos you can do with Execute. So yeah, Execute phase on the two-hander, on the 2handed Fury will be a little bit more potent than on the arms counterpart. So let's look at the signature ability, if you want to call it like that, that those both specs have available to them. So with the 2handed Fury, we spec into Bloodthirst just because we need to. And with the arms, we obviously spec into Mortal Strike, right? So what are the differences between those abilities? Mortal Strike does one weapon swing. So it scales on weapon damage, right? But it scales on attack power as well, because attack power increases our weapon damage when we look at the sheet right here. So 100 attack power gives us 30 damage. Depend on the weapon speed. Slower weapons gain more damage from attack power. This is just because, let's take a small example. We get 30 damage for 100 attack power. Apply that to a dagger and think a little bit further. You can see that this would just be ridiculous. So yeah, this is why slow weapons obviously need to scale better on attack power. But with a weapon that is like roundabout 3-6 speed, which would be, for example, the Lionheart champion, will get 30 damage from 100 attack power. This mace gets a little bit more because he is a little bit slower. So this means that Mortal Strike gets 30 damage for 100 attack power. Bloodthirst gets 100 damage for 100 attack power, so we scale a little bit better on attack power here. But you need to keep in mind that Mortal Strike has such a high base damage if you use a two-hander that there will be like almost no scenario in which right now in which your Bloodthirst would overcome the Mortal Strike in damage per rage spent. Maybe this changes if you get a lot of gear, so therefore you get a lot of attack power, and maybe you get maybe a damage proc from a weapon enchant, or attack power proc that is, or maybe you get you use your on-hit trinket, your ratio, all that stuff. Maybe there will be a point where Bloodthirst overcomes Mortal Strike even with a two-hander. On this point, if we reach this point, Two-Handed Fury will actually be a lot stronger than arms. But yeah, I don't really know if we ever gonna reach that. So, what does that mean? That Mortal Strike is like the better button to press than Bloodthirst. This means that the single target here we have a slight advantage for single target DPS for the arms warrior, because Mortal Strike or Bloodthirst is single target button really. In AoE, the 30 rage most of the time you can spend better on other abilities, or you'll be better off spending this 30 rage with other abilities. Alright, so let's look at some differences in the talent tree. Let's first look at what we miss with Two-Handed Fury. So obviously we miss Blood Frenzy. So like I said before, Blood Frenzy, especially in a raid, or only in a raid really, is a great DPS increase for your overall raid damage. And if you don't have someone who applies this debuff, you want to be the one that is doing that. So here, there's that. The other difference that we have is we have no improved discipline. So that means a little bit less, or not a little bit, and it's actually a lot less uptime on recklessness, or a lot less duration on recklessness, which again comes more into play when you look at single target situations, because using recklessness in AoE is extremely good value, but to be honest, most of the time you will just die because of that, because there's like almost no one can hold that threat if you push in with a two-hander, use a good rotation, and use recklessness and cooldowns in an AoE. There will be like almost no one that can hold that threat unless they are AoE taunting, or there are like multiple tanks having mobs assigned to them, or there is like a paladin with max willpower, max gear, and you give them a little bit of time to build up threat. So most of the time this improved discipline is only a disadvantage in single target situations. So there again we see a small advantage for arms in single target. So let's look at the specializations, the weapon specializations. as two-handed Fury, you have the option, and only the option, you don't need to, but you have the option to skip those specializations for mainly improved Berserker stance or precision or improved Whirlwind or maybe piercing howl. So this means that if you run a mace, or if the best weapon that you have available to you is a mace, Two-Handed Fury becomes really good, because if you would spec arms with this mace, you kinda need to spec into mace specialization, and mace specialization is extremely troll for PvE DPS. Unless you're running a dungeon and you think it's kind of funny to stun those mobs around you, and yeah, so but in single target this is extremely troll, and you really don't want to spec into this. So there's an advantage, for a big advantage, or a big reason to go Two-Handed Fury if you're running a mace. With the other specializations, you can spec into poleaxe or sword, and then you would just take out some points out of here, or a point out of here. So if you take 3 points out of that, 1 point out of here, and 1 point out of improved Whirlwind, you still can use 2 Whirlwinds in your sweeping strikes window. You still can put in 5 points into sword specialization or axe specialization. Okay, so this is what the arms has over the Two-Handed Fury. So let's look what the Two-Handed Fury has over the arms. So the Two-Handed Fury has access to piercing howl. The arms could as well, but the arms would need to sacrifice like 1 point weapon mastery for that, or 1 point into commanding presence, and this is obviously not really that good. So yeah, the Two-Handed Fury can easily pick up a point for piercing howl, which is again pretty nice in AoE situations and especially dungeons. So there we get again a little bit of an advantage if we play Two-Handed Fury for cleave and dungeon situations. So then we get 2 points more into Flurry. This is just an overall DPS increase, both for single target and multi-target, and it's a significant one as well. So what else? We have improved Whirlwind. We already talked about that enough, and now we can look at precision. So precision gives us 1% more hit, which is if you can work with the extra hit that you gain from precision, you can look at this talent as like 1% crit, like round about 20 strength, so 40 attack power, maybe even a little bit more than that. So this precision skill can be really, really good. Right now I use 1 point because 2 points would be too much for me. With this 1 point, I can use my T4 pants and my tier 5 gloves, which and I can that's really it, and I can use the different bracers. So there is why precision makes good value for me right now. And if you go for this spec, you should look through all your gear that you could set up on your character, and then see if precision is good for you and how many points you want to spend into that. At this point, I want to mention that if you have a boomkin in your raid group, it will almost I think it's like kind of required, will use improved Furry fire, which will increase your hit chance on this mob by 3%. So this means you only need 6. So this is why right now I have 5 plus this 1 means equals 6, right? So then there is improved Berserker stance, which you would only really skill or spec into if you're running a mace. And what this does is increase our attack power by 2% per skill point. So this is right now, this is 6%. And this, we already talked about that we scale a little bit better on attack power than arms. And in addition, we maybe use a lot slower weapon because a lot of the maces are like really slow. And so this is why you really want to consider that, especially if you're running a slow mace. And we get 6% less threat cost, which can be 6% more damage or even more. Depend if you would die. Yeah, like if you would die without the 6%, then it's obviously a massive DPS increase. Alright, so let's look at the mace in particular that I have right now, because before this mace is relatively free because no one really wants it. So you might be able to get your hands on that, and or you may very likely to get your hands on that. And so you should really consider doing that, because you can use this spec and this mace, and I will tell you how you want to use this mace. So let's look at this mace, the mace window.
Hello
so
there.
it has 50 strength, which is really nice because it's 100 attack power, which means it's a 30 top end again. And let's see, the swing speed is 3.7, so it's slower than most weapons, and this is great advantage as well. It has 585 top end damage, which is really huge compared to the weapons that we have available before that. So you're not really likely to get your Lionheart champion upgraded first. You're not really likely to get your hands on the sword from KT. And yeah, so therefore, like, because it's the end boss and because it first need to drop and stuff like this, so you maybe you're stuck a little bit on this world breaker, so it's worth to talk about it. It has 51 stamina, which is really great if you ask me, because 51 stamina is 510 HP, and if you look at stamina, you might think that it's not a DPS increase, just because on sim DPS, stamina is obviously no increase to your DPS, or if you hitting a dummy, it's no increase. But in reality, you will pull aggro on ads or trash packs once upon a time, and having like 500 HP more or less can very well be the difference between life and death. For example, when you saw the video of my gruel kill this week, I died by overkill of 300. So if I would have used this mace, I wouldn't have died, for example. So stamina can be a huge DPS increase, especially because with more stamina, sometimes you can soak just a little bit more of those cave-ins or those fire on the ground or this fire on the ground, and yeah. So do not underestimate stamina, and do not underestimate plate gear, because yeah, it's just like by nature you will pull aggro once upon a time, and some mobs have a cleave or a whirlwind, and if you stack a lot of HP and a lot of armor, you can like just stand in that whirlwind. For example, I give a small example right now just to show you the difference. Last raid I had 12.7k HP and I had full plate. So, and when we ran into the raid, the first trash packs have a whirlwind, right? So guess how much HP the whirlwind, like for how much percent of my HP the whirlwind hit me? 20. So I could just soak 2 of those whirlwinds at the same time and only lose 40% of my HP and gain like 100 rage for that. This whirlwind almost one-shots or sometimes one-shots a coffee. So there's the comparison for you, so you really understand how powerful stamina and plate gear really are. So then you see I used Crusader on that mace. This has a couple of reasons. First of all, Crusader gives you 100 strength, which is 200 attack power, which is 60 top end, or in this mace even a little bit more. And 60 top end is a huge thing. On Bloodthirst it gives you 100 extra damage, and it has a good uptime. For example, if you look here, we have Holy Strength with a 35% uptime on a 3-minute fight. So that's really nice. You might think that Mungus is really good as well, and that's true because it gives you crit. But let's look on the extra thing that this mace really makes special, or yeah, the thing that this mace makes special is you have a chance on hit to increase the critical strike rating of your next attack made within 4 seconds by 900. So this is basically a free crit. And if you proc this, you make a thunderclap. You make a very visible thunderclap animation, and yeah, it's therefore you can really tell when this procs. And I had 4 applications on the I had 6 applications on the last DPS test, and this is sometimes even more. So you really want to watch out for those procs, because most of the time you want to use it for an auto attack, and this is due to our rotation, where we always kind of wait for the auto attack before we use some abilities. It's really doable to do that, so you get a lot of chances to use this proc for an auto attack, because the auto attack crit will give you tons of rage. Like, this thing hits harder than the sword, and it has lower attack speed, so you get more rage from the attacks with the World Breaker than with, for example, your other options, the Lionheart Champion. And yeah, therefore using those 900 crit on your next attack for the auto attack is a great idea. In addition, if you are in an AoE scenario, you can kind of plan to use it on, for example, a Whirlwind, which can be extremely potent, like a Whirlwind that has almost 100% crit. Yeah, this is pretty good if you ask me. So yeah, this mace is really a very good option if you want to run two-handed Fury. And yeah, so you really want to consider that. Like, if your group doesn't care if they get an arms or not, because they are not really into this support kind of thingies, because yeah, the shamans are not really twisting and yeah, stuff like that, then you could use two-handed Fury. If you have already an arms warrior in your group, you could use two-handed Fury. Or if you're just farming out in the world, or you run a lot of dungeons, then two-handed Fury really comes in pretty hot. So single target DPS is just a tiny bit stronger on two-handed Fury, depending on the weapon you have available. If you have a good sword or a good axe, I think that arms is just a tiny bit ahead. But if you have a mace, two-handed Fury is not only a lot of much better in AoE, it's also much better in single target. But yeah, again, if you do not have arms in your raid, you shouldn't really go for this spec. What else is here to say? Yeah, I should tell you how the rotation changes, because it doesn't really change, but slightly a little bit changes. So what changes is that the priority of your Mortal Strike or your Bloodthirst will decrease a lot. You don't really want to use Bloodthirst ever in single target or AoE, doesn't matter, unless you have like 50 plus rage. Otherwise, you do not want to use Bloodthirst. In other words, if you delay your Slam or your Whirlwind for the Bloodthirst, you do not want to do that. The other thing is that Slam becomes pretty insane with more top end and and a higher like attack speed and stuff like that. So you really want to use your Slam in the right way, and you want to use the spam method for Slam a little bit more than if you would with arms. Because remember, you stop Slam spamming with arms if you can use Mortal Strike. On two-handed Fury this changes. The Slam spam method has like a a higher priority than your Bloodthirst. So yeah, this is what changes a little bit at the end of this. So almost right now I will show you some little clips where you can really see the potential of two-handed Fury, especially with this big mace. And years. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you, if you drop this mace and you don't really know what to do, I hope this video helps you a lot. So the next video will be about execute rotation together with recklessness, and this is a really interesting one. So yeah, I look forward to that. See you then.